Hey guys, Keegan Russell here. You are listening to the KC Sports Authority podcast. I got my guys Spencer and JB with me again here today. In today's episode, we want to catch you up on some of the rumblings and rumors of the transfer portal in regards to KU basketball, or I guess the lack thereof movement we've had so far the last couple weeks. 2 weeks ago, we put out our episode of what we think could happen in the offseason. Put in a couple names of transfers to be on the lookout for, and it's been a couple weeks since then. There's a little bit of movement and some traction, so we'll talk about that, go through some scenarios, talk about a couple different guys that we know are going to come in for visits and kind of see our interest in them being on the team. We'll talk a little bit about the guys that have left the program already, see if any of them have signed anywhere else, talk about the chances of a couple guys coming back. So with that, guys, let's get into it. First off, to you guys listeners, just want to say thank you. Our last episode, we had a lot of support for it. It was our first episode we've done where we've had over 1,000 views on YouTube, which is fantastic. Hopefully that's the first of many more to come. So thank you guys for checking that last one out, and I hope this one is just as good, if not better. That being said, boys, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm just so excited. I think it's it's an exciting season. It's an exciting time of year to see how everything is falling, especially nowadays. So really looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, I'm good as well. NBA playoffs start today, so that'll be fun. And get to see Christian Brown in a first round series as the one seed, so it's pretty hype.
The playoffs, I've actually watched a lot of NBA this last week, and Spencer, we'll do a playoff episode here soon. But when it comes to the transfer portal, it's been pretty quiet on KU's end. We've seen names pop up here and there. We've seen KU's had interest. Honestly, the most news we've gotten so far. Let's start with the guys that are going out. This all got started with Cam Martin entering the transfer portal, which none of us were surprised about. He has now signed with Boise State, and he's actually a package deal where his younger brother is going to join him as a walk-on there, which is pretty neat. But Cam going to Boise State, actually a pretty solid fit there. I was looking through their roster. They kind of need a guy with his skill set, kind of like KU did this last year too. But he should be able to slide in and get some good playing time. So that's awesome for him. Congrats, Cam. Hope you have a fantastic season. The next guy, Bobby Pettiford, had a couple schools, a little bit smaller schools, and he decided to go back closer to home to Eastern Carolina, which, again, KU fans, I'm one personally, anytime a guy transfers out, I don't have any ill favor towards them. I'm always going to keep up with what they're doing and hope they do well. So, Bobby, good luck out there. The rest of the guys, they're sitting in limbo still. We've seen some teams that are interested in Yesufu. And honestly, Drake is back on his radar. I don't know if that's legit or if that's just putting it out there to put names on the list. But I'm sure he's probably going to be going to a school that's a little bit smaller of a school to get some decent playing time. Then you got the guys like MJ Rice and Zach Clements. Both of them, there's been nothing. Zilch, not a word from what I've seen so far. We'll get into the possibility of those guys coming back. I don't think it's likely, but it's still on the table. Am I missing anybody? I don't think so. There was those four transferred out. We got Kevin, Jalen, and Grady leaving. Still don't know about Carter Cup. Okay, so that's kind of a quick snapshot of where the things stand now. Now, since this last episode we have a bit more information on some guys entering the portal as well as guys joining the team. So obviously we know the incoming freshman class, Jamari McDowell, Chris Johnson, Elmarco Jackson. And now we for sure know that Marcus Adams is reclassifying to join the squad in the fall. He signs his national letter of intent here in a couple days. So he's now added to the mix. So we're still looking at about 2 to 3 to 4 transfers still, or other freshman signings. So there's still several more spots to fill out, and obviously most of that being the starting lineup, as we will get into here. But I think the biggest news for KU fans in regards to the transfer portal is some of the names that have come out since the three of us talked last. At that time, none of us had any idea Hunter Mickelson, Hunter Mickelson, flashback, KU, Hunter Dickinson entered the transfer portal. And that is probably the biggest transfer name we've probably ever seen in the transfer portal as far as just hype, high rank, just quality player. The guy's a walking double-double, 7-footer who can step out and shoot. So no brainer that he's linked to KU. He'd probably be the best transfer product KU could ever go after and get up to this point in the transfer portal. So his name's entered in. KU's obviously on a short list. He's got an official visit scheduled next weekend, but he's also got a couple visits still. He had West Virginia and Maryland, which actually both teams would be good fits for him as well. So a little bit of worry there, but right now KU is the front runner. This is still early on in the process. I know a lot of KU fans are like, man, nothing is going on. We're just sitting here waiting, watching the time go by. Not a single person signed yet. That's okay. We're still early on in the process. The draft hasn't even happened yet. We still got a ways to go for that. The last 2 years, guys like Remy Martin, Kevin McCullar were late additions because both of them were testing the draft and then came back. So there's still plenty of movement that could happen, but I understand as fans, we're like, okay, we got to see something. We still have all these open spots. So I'm not stressed about it. Are either of you guys worried with the lack of movement so far?
I'm not really too worried. I think it plays into all the trust that we have for Bill Self. And like you'd mentioned, there's still so much time. The draft hasn't happened. There are people that could pull out of the draft and then enter their name in the transfer portal. Sometimes it's good to see how those pieces fall. I will say the only downside to waiting is, there's always going to be names that we're missing out on. I personally, I don't know how much interest, I'm sure plenty of interest that Bill Self would have had in him, but LJ Cryer from Baylor, if we had hopped on that really early, and I don't know if we even really had a chance. He's going to Houston. He's transferring to Houston. He's going home, and he's not far from. He's not trying to leave the state of Texas. Maybe that was in his mind, but I just think guys like LJ Cryer would have been great additions to the team with his shooting. That would have been incredible. But that's not to say that we can't get someone comparable by waiting and just seeing how the dominoes fall. We have a lot of spots open in our roster. So the comfort that I have mostly is in Bill Self, trusting in him, trusting that players across the country want to play for Bill Self, who is not even arguably, he is the best college coach in America, hands down. It's no debate, not a debate anymore. And I can't imagine there'd be a lot of people that would want to pass up on him. So, and we have the space in our roster. So I know that the dominoes will fall accordingly. So I'm keeping the positive vibes. I'm keeping the faith.
Yeah, I think it's just too early. Guys are going to test the water, and they're gonna go on all the visits. They're going to be wine and dined. Now with the NIL, it's pretty much like attracting a free agent at this point. So I think it's going to come down to what are guys valuing. So if you're a guy that's a fringe NBA prospect, you're going to want to probably get as much national exposure as you can. And Kansas is going to have the majority of their games on ESPN and not ESPN 2 plus 3, 4, however many channels there are. So if a guy's looking for exposure, that's going to be a good, place to go. If they're looking to win, it's also going to be a good place to be at. So I think there's a lot of things working well with us, but guys are always going to look at their options first. And you're going to have instances like Hunter Dickinson's from Maryland. So obviously he's going to be looking at that, and that's going back to your hometown is always going to be an option. But I think if guys are looking for to be in the spotlight more to try to get some NBA scouting, to try to get some NIL deals, I think we're far and beyond one of the best options out here. So I know we'll fill those roster spots. It just depends on who.
Yeah, I think this offseason is a little different than years past where we have a lot of spots that are open, whereas some years before it's like, man, we just need that one guy or two guys, and you want to find that guy quick because you think, hey, we're ready to compete now. not saying that KU can't compete this next year, but because they have so many spots open, I think it allows the coaching staff to be a little more selective in who they're going after. Um, so again, I don't have much concern. Now, if we're 6 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, and we've only gotten one guy in and it's not a big headline name, I could see the fans having a little bit more worry. But I think just the way this team's set up, there's a lot of directions we can go. And, for me, I think the transfer portal right now, everything's kind of hinging and waiting on Hunter Dickinson. Because if KU lands Hunter Dickinson, then that completely changes how they're going to play next year. They're going to get back to the old school, dump it down low, back to the basket score, average 20 and 10, and then surround them with athletic bodies. If Hunter Dickinson decides to go to somewhere else, then I think that does change up KU's game plan on what type of team they need to put together. So let's get into some of the names out there right now. Obviously when we got on this last time, some of the big names we talked about, Khalif Battle was up there for all of us. And he's now signed with Indiana. There's a big man out of Oregon, Khalil Ware, also signed with Indiana. So he's off the table.
Was it Indiana for Khalif?
One of them might have been Arkansas, actually.
It was that was Khalif Battles in Arkansas.
Yeah, one went to Arkansas, one went to Indiana. So both those guys are gone that KU's been linked to. The other big names, obviously like LJ Cryer, that was one kind of a shock, but two, very surprised that he didn't at least go visit K-State. Like as soon as I saw his name and I was like, yep, he's going to K-State. That's a no-brainer.
Same.
And he's still going to be haunting us in the Big 12 regardless now with Houston joining the Big 12. But the names right now you're hearing a lot of, last week, Nicholas Timberlake, who we mentioned on the last podcast as a potential target. He had a visit last weekend during the spring game. I would be absolutely shocked if he doesn't end up signing with us. He still has a visit with UConn this next week. He visited North Carolina last week. He's one of those older upperclassmen who is also going to be very selective with where he goes for his last year. But he would fit in nicely, 6'4", shooting guard. Not the best defender, but he shot over 40% from three this last year, averaged 17 points a game. Easily could fit in as a scoring option either in the starting lineup or off the bench. I would be shocked if we don't see something in the next week or two from him. I think after his UConn visit, sometime next week, we'll hear some more traction on him. But he's probably the most likely option so far. Other guys that they're in the mix in, obviously Hunter Dickinson. It's been officially announced that he will be in that visit next week into Kansas. But he's still got, I think, one or two more visits after that. That would obviously be huge getting him. Other guys, though, we mentioned last go around a guy from Stanford, Spencer Jones. Doesn't sound like there's any traction there, but one of his teammates, Harrison Ingram, who honestly would be a little bit better fit. He's about a 6'7", 6'8", wing forward stretch guy, long, athletic, highly recruited coming out. Has kind of slipped this last year. His freshman year, he was the freshman of the year in the Pac-12, but this last year struggled a little bit. Guy that can average double-digit figures, can guard multiple positions, super athletic, long-armed. Would be a great addition to the roster. He would fill the 3 spot very nicely. He has an official visit next week as well with KU. Again, he's one that I think sounds pretty likely that he's going to come here. And the other guy, he hasn't done a visit yet, and I'm kind of surprised there's not a lot of traction. I've been trying to find some info, but that's Graham Ike, the big man out of Wyoming. Kind of a traditional back to the basket guy, traditional big man. KU's been one of his finalists teams, top 5 teams, but we really haven't seen anything else coming from him. He's on the list. And then one that was recently added this about a week ago, who I would love, and that's Matthew Cleveland, the guard forward combo from Florida State. Another guy that's about 6'7", long, athletic, pretty solid shooter, can shoot close to 40% from three. He had a very solid season this last year. Didn't do a whole lot in the tournament necessarily from what they needed with Florida State, but I think he'd be a near perfect fit in this roster. But those are kind of some of the big names, and of course, like we talked about, with the draft process coming, there's going to be more guys that enter in there. Even probably the other biggest name in the market right now, which I don't think is a Kansas fit, that's Max Abmas from Oral Roberts, the top scorer in college basketball right now. He's got a visit with K-State. I would be shocked if he doesn't transfer to K-State. That seems like it's a no-brainer for him. based on the other schools recruiting him. But that's the other kind of big name out there.
I'm hearing Texas for him too, for
Mhm.
Max. Yeah, and he would be a nightmare.
He
Please go
needs
to
a big
Texas so we
stage.
don't have to. Yeah, I mean the NIL money at both schools I feel like would be similar, but you could probably go more on Texas. Um, but if he goes to Texas, we won't have to deal with him next season. So that would be pretty nice.
And speaking of Texas, that reminds me of one more name I was forgetting about. Tyler Perry. Not the Tyler Perry, of course, but Tyler Perry, a guard from North Texas, helped lead North Texas to the NIT championship this year. He averaged over 17 a game, high scoring guard, which would also fit in nicely. But before we break it down any of those guys, are there any other names you guys have seen or players that you still have interest in that you think would be a good transfer fit?
No, those are really the big guys I've seen. The big four I've seen is Dickinson, Timberlake, Edwards, and this Ingram from Stanford. And it's going to depend on, like you kind of said, as soon as Dickinson makes this decision, if we get Dickinson, we're probably not going to get another big guy to transfer over, which, makes sense. So I think out of Edwards and Dickinson, we'll land one. And then, I would love to ideally get Timberlake and Ingram, but having those big athletic, guards, especially ones that could shoot, that would be fantastic.
I guess the other one that's still out there too, I didn't mention him because I don't think it's likely because I don't know if he fits well with DeJuan Harris, but that'd be Ryan Nimhard from Creighton. He'd be another bigger name that's on the market, but again, I don't know if his fit next to DeJuan makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I was going to mention Nemhard. It's there's an argument to you can never have too much of a good thing. So having both of them as just options, you don't even have to start them both. But I feel like Nemhard wants to start. Um, and Bill Self loves to start two guys just like them. But I would say I would say my eyes are definitely glued to some of the names we've already mentioned. Um, Harrison Ingram is predicted to go to Kansas if you look at Crystal Ball. Um, and as far as Timberlake, I think that's right on point. He's got an easy fit here. Could easily be your Grady Dick replacement. Harrison Ingram could be a replacement for Jalen. Maybe not in the sense of how much scoring he does, but just in his athleticism, his hustle. He's a decent shooter. The thing about Harrison Ingram that I really like is his high IQ. He's the same size as Jalen, so and he's not as good of a rebounder, but we won't need that rebounding prowess when we have hopefully KJ and Hunter, right? So that's those are the biggest names I'm looking for.
Yeah, not Harrison being from Stanford. I think Stanford players don't get enough credit for their play style. I mean, obviously, if you're going to Stanford for school in general, you're probably high IQ. Now, I don't know if that
Sure.
always translates to the sports side, but the way that Stanford systems run, they play very physical. They're tough. Defense is a very high priority. They're aggressive. They're physical. So I just think anybody that comes out of that system, you can find somewhere to plug them in. And I think Ingram would be great. Of all these guys, I think the only one you're really asking to come in and be the guy would be Hunter Dickinson. So let's just imagine for a moment that Dickinson, tomorrow we hear he signs. First off, from a fan, how exciting is that? And then secondly, what do you think he looks like in a Bill Self system? Because I already know what he's going to look like, but what do you guys think would happen with him in
Dude,
this system?
I instantly think national title. Instantly. That's just I can see the trophy. I can see the confetti coming down. And I don't want to overreact there, but I really do think that's a possibility. Hunter Dickinson is just a pure prototype of a Bill Self guy. He could average 22 and 12 if he really wanted. The lobs that he would catch from DeJuan are just imminent. Like it's going to happen where he would dominate. Now, for him to dominate, it would mean that other people have to kind of take a back seat. I think KJ would have a regression. I think you start them both. KJ would kind of have a new role on the team, which would be interesting. But I don't think that's such a bad thing. And on the off chance that any one of them is in foul trouble, we know what to do and how to change our strategy on the fly in mid game. So, yeah, when I hear about Hunter Dickinson, I think instant national title. But maybe that's me being a little too optimistic, but that's kind of my calling card. So,
yeah. I mean, I would think it just opens up a lot of possibilities with our roster. I think it almost benefits KJ a little bit because now we're not going to have to worry about spacing because our five guy can step out and
Mm.
shoot threes. So that's going to be a little bit better. And so then you don't have to worry about KJ playing in the elbows and having the leg clogged up because you got somebody on the right or left block. So I think it offers up a lot of potential for what we can do. I think it sets the play style for the entire year. If Bill Self gets another dominant big, he's going right back to his bread and butter, which is going to be good. I do think it's also going to set a precedent for KU landing these kind of transfer portal guys. I mean, we're having a guy that's a perennial, top 10 player probably in the country leaving his school that he's been at for so long and then just coming to Kansas. I think that's going to go well for getting future guys from the portal too, which will be very good. And the last thing I would say is that it's going to probably change how we shape the roster as well. So it's going to change who we go after, and the transfer portal are going to go after a lot of shooters so we can, draw guys in and kick it out. So I'm excited about the possibilities it would bring because I think it's going to really give us some options on how we want to go into next year.
Dickinson would easily be a finalist candidate for National Player of the Year, first team All American. Yeah, it's a perfect fit. And I think for me, I've talked about this before with you guys. When it comes to the big man for KU, we've had some pretty solid ones over the years, but it's not often KU gets the 7-footer kind of guy. Doak was right up there, but Doak didn't develop that much until later in his career. Embiid, of course, you had that, but his time was cut short because of how quickly he developed at the end of the year. But this would be awesome for KU because we never have that guy that when you look across college basketball, the last couple of years where even though he's not a 7-footer, but Oscar Tshiebwe with Kentucky, where you just go, holy cow, that's a matchup nightmare. What do we do? Back a couple years ago with Illinois, Kofi Coburn, that 7-footer, just monster dude that every night he's going to get a walking double-double. Even Adamo Sanogo this last year for UConn. Just we don't often have that guy. McCormick had a good season here and there, but was never the guy, never that dominant big man. Doak had that his senior year. He was pretty dominant, but he wasn't the I'm getting you 20 a night in the paint all the time and you can't stop me. So that I think that would be huge. So let's play a scenario for a second. KU lands Hunter Dickinson. Dewan and KJ are in the starting lineup, of course, in this scenario. KJ probably slots in at the 4. Bill Self gets back to some of that high-low action. How would you guys round out those other 2 spots on the floor? And in this scenario, I'm going to say I think it's likely that Elmarko Jackson is the 2 guard in this lineup. The athleticism and the ability he has, as long as he can play defense, I think he's the 2 guard unless we get someone better.
yeah, I think Elmarko is definitely the guy for that 2 spot. Now, of course, that's if we don't get anybody else. I really, really like Nicholas Timberlake for that spot. If we do get him. So, but on the off chance we don't, I think he's there. I can't see a scenario where we start Dewan, Elmarko, and Nicholas Timberlake. I think we'd have to go a slightly different direction. But if it was me, if I had Dewan, KJ, and Hunter, I'm looking at Elmarko and probably Marcus Adams.
Yeah, that would probably be the route I would imagine. It depends if we get Timberlake, because if we get him, he's going to probably obviously be the starting 2 guy. and then you can have Marcus Adams at 6'8", and that gives us so much size. I mean, DeJuan's a really lengthy point guard, long, wingspan, and then you got 6'4" at the 2, 6'8" at the 3 with Adams, and then KJ is undersized as a 5 guy, but as a 4, I think he's pretty much in the sweet spot. And then you have 7-1 with Dickinson, so that would give us a really really big lineup. And we've kind of had an issue with, all right, having, if your best rebounder on your team's a wing, usually that means you're going to get out rebounded a good amount. And so we have that kind of size on the team. That's going to be a good way to prevent, second chance points, which always kill us. And the even bigger thing is it's going to prevent offensive rebounds leading to a wide open 3 because of defense collapse. So I would like to avoid those pitfalls that we've kind of fallen into, and I think that kind of size lineup is going to be good for it.
Yeah, Dickinson definitely will give KU the most versatility as far as options that they can put together. I don't think there's as many concerns you have if you have a guy like Dickinson in the lineup, because you could go heavy on defense, especially if a guy like Kevin McCullar comes back and you slot him back in at the 3 with KJ. 4 of your 5 guys there are high quality defenders at their positions. 2 of them with DeJuan and KJ, or with DeJuan and Kevin, could argue for National Defensive Player of the Year, first team all defense, all that kind of stuff. So KU could just go all defense and then just dump it down to Dickinson every night for some point. So I think that would be exciting. I think what's funny about transfer portal talk in the offseason is right now there's more hype for landing some of the transfer portal than there is talk of the incoming freshman class. And I get it, because the freshman class, we haven't seen them. We've only seen them at the high school level. Some of these transfer players, you have 1, 2, 3 years of college basketball, to show for. And so I get it. But we still have 4 incoming freshmen that are solid athletes. I don't think anyone expects the 4 of them to just show up overnight and be the guy. But I wouldn't be surprised if, some of the lack of movement is because there's a lot of trust that what those guys bring to the table could fit in. Ultimately, I still think we're going to land probably 2 or 3 more upperclassmen transfers to fill in, but there's still potential for those incoming freshman guys to make an impact. And I think El Marco, as if you guys watched the McDonald's All-American game, I mean, he was electric, jumping all over the floor, super quick, strong with the ball, can shoot pretty well. I think he's going to be very exciting. And if we don't go get a real experienced guy, I think El Marco's got a good shot of being a high quality scorer for us early on. So let's talk about McCullar for a second. At the banquet end of the year gala that KU had the other night, Bill Self basically got up there and said, "Kevin, you coming here was fantastic. Super happy to have you this last year. I would love to have you back for another year," kind of thing. And, the likelihood of that maybe isn't that high. Kevin went through this process last year where it was test the draft waters, see what the feedback is. Feedback was, hey, you're not getting a guaranteed contract. You're probably going to be a 2-way guy or go undrafted. So he comes back, gets the exposure at KU, has a pretty decent season. Obviously, there's a big hole in his game when it comes to shooting. There's just no consistency there. But he's testing the draft waters again. If he were to come back, he'd be one of the older guys in the league. He'd be about 25. It'd be his 6th year. Self said in an interview that, from that aspect, he can understand why he doesn't come back, because he could go somewhere else and get more exposure overseas. Sorry, guys, my dog is thinking someone's trying to break into the house, but it's not the case. Hey, lay down. Anyway. So McCullar could potentially come back. Right now he's projected to be one of the final picks in the draft or go undrafted, which isn't a guarantee for a contract. I think from what it sounds like, his camp is looking for a contract guarantee. So if he doesn't get that, then maybe he does come back, or maybe he goes overseas. But if he did come back, how do you guys think that changes the dynamic of the team going to the fall, and how that would kind of change the process? I mean, obviously we won't find out from that for another 5-6 weeks. Because they have to withdraw their names in May. But if he did come back, what do you think that does for the structure of the team moving forward?
I think it brings up a lot of question marks, but I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad at it if he comes back. If he came back, I don't know. I look at the possibility of landing like Harrison Ingram kind of diminishes. I think they're different players, but I just think you can't get everybody and bring back a key piece like Kevin McCullar because look, these guys that are transferring, they're wanting they're wanting not only a fresh start, but they want to start. And if there's really any competition, I feel like they probably won't come to Kansas in that scenario. So you know we can't get everybody, but are we really complaining if the defensive prowess and experience of Kevin McCullar comes back and comes back to a system that he knows now? I don't think so. I think it'd be pretty sweet. You know that he would start, and it would be fun. I think you know as long as we get Hunter, and and then if we have Dewan and KJ and Kevin and El Marco, I think that's a solid starting five. So I love it. I think we of course need to make sure our shooting is on point. I think it would look a lot like I mean that team not only because there's three starters from the prior year, but it would look a lot um like the 2022-23 team um in some aspects, but Hunter changes a lot. So my my overall thinking is we definitely improve. So I want him to come back, but if he doesn't, I do think it opens the door for a high level transfer. So it's kind of like you get to pick your I wouldn't say pick your poison because they're both amazing outcomes, but I think either he comes back or maybe we land a guy like Harrison Ingram.
Yeah, I mean, I'd obviously like to have McCullough back. I mean, it'd be great to have a top, 10, 5, defender in the entire country come back. The only thing, obviously, yeah, I would worry about is how the spacing is going to shape out because we kind of saw it this year. The way this roster was constructed, you had a guy who's the primary scorer on our team was a slasher, and he just, he lived on getting to the bucket and if those driving lanes are going to be clogged, then that's going to just present the same problem that we had this year with shooting. So it would affect. I don't think Harrison Ingram comes if McCullough comes back. Um, it also would be a case. Let's say McCullough comes back, and let's say we get Nicholas Timberlake. That also is going to mean that the high recruits, neither one of them is going to start. And I feel like if we go year after year with these highly touted recruits coming to KU and getting no playing time, it's going to set a really bad precedence, for going forward for, freshmen coming here. Because I feel like one of the reasons we don't get as much as the Duke and Kentucky is number one, we pay less, but number two, they don't, they're not going to come in and get the starting role right away. And I'm not saying that as a critique. I don't think I would change that. But if we just load up on transfers, this year and we get a lot of returning guys, El Marco and Marcus Adams not getting a lot of playing time might not look great. So I don't know. There's pros and cons. Ultimately, I would like to have him back. I think he's projected to go late second round right now. I saw the mock draft come out at I think 53. I think he can make an NBA roster. He's a good enough defender. He can develop a jumper. It's not like his mechanics are broken or anything like that. He can grow into a 3-and-D guy. So I don't know. We'll just have to see what he decides.
Yeah, I think anytime you can play the defense the way McCullough can, you're gonna at least get a camp invite and have an opportunity to earn a spot. You might be that 11th, 12th, 13th guy off the bench, but it's gonna put you in a position to where maybe the guy I like into like the Nets this year with Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas should be playing all the time because the dude is a walking bucket and can get 40 any night. But he can't play defense worth a darn, and so you don't see him get a lot of playing time. So that would give McCullough an edge over guys that have that high scoring potential but aren't NBA ready necessarily on a night in night out basis defensively. I still expect him to go pro, whether it's there or overseas. I don't think he comes back, but of course, if he does, instantly makes KU one of the best defensive teams in the country. Gives them more age again, gives them more experience. But Spencer, I do think you bring up a great point about the freshmen. because that's something I've thought about too the last several years is KU doesn't usually have one of the top recruiting classes as a whole anymore since the one and done era has kind of become a monster thing. We've only seen what really honestly three guys, Wiggins, Josh Jackson
Jackson.
And Grady Dick be those guys that are your typical high quality freshmen that get plugged in right away and are a very important part of the offense. But yeah, those other guys, I mean, like this last year is a perfect example. I thought coming into the year we had one of the deepest teams we've ever had because top to bottom talent, you're like, wow, we can go all over the place. But I also know Bill Self has a tight rotation, and DeJuan's going to play 35 minutes a night. KJ is going to play 30 to 35 minutes a night. This last year, Jalen was going to play 35 plus, McCullar 35 plus. So you start adding all that up, and it's like there's only a handful of minutes. And the way Bill Self coaches, which I'm not complaining about, if you can't produce in those 3 minutes, then you're not seeing the field anymore. And sometimes the byproduct of that is you don't get a rhythm. We saw that with MJ Rice. He just couldn't get consistent playing time. We know the talent is there. We know the ability is there. But if he can't get on the court, then he's not going to have the opportunity to develop. And it's kind of that catch-22 if you want them to come in and play it right away, but if they're not ready, then in the Bill Self system, they don't get a lot of opportunity. He likes to have those older, more experienced guys. And so I do see that point of if we really load up on transfers, then, do Chris Johnson and Jamari McDowell both redshirt, and are they comfortable with it? I could see maybe Marcus Adams redshirting just because he's so young and he'd be okay with it maybe. But El Marco, I think he needs to be the two guard going to the season just with the way the structure is now, because I think that'll showcase his athleticism. I think that's a good place to wrap up for now. KU fans, as more info comes out with the transfer portal, we'll obviously talk about it. But coming up, we've got big week ahead with Harrison Ingram coming in, and then Hunter Dickinson. Would be huge to land both of them. And I think if KU lands both, then they've got a pretty solid starting five to round out, and then we'll wait to see what happens with Nicholas Timberlake. Wait to hear what happens with Kevin McCullar, see if there's any potential coming back or any of the other guys transferring out. Still waiting on news with Kyle Cuff. He hasn't for sure said anything, but it sounds like him, Zuby, and Ernest are all staying. Unless, KU signs a couple more guards and Cuff decides to leave. So still a lot of information coming. So, stay up to date, stay tuned. Plenty of people you should be following on Twitter to get that information. Should be following us as well. We're starting to pick up a little bit more, trying to use our Twitter account on a more regular basis when I'm not working to share information. So follow us. You can find us on Twitter at KCSAPod. Give us a like and a follow. We'll follow you back. Hit us up on Facebook as well. I know we have different demographics of listeners, and we do have quite a few that find us on Facebook and follow us there. Share with us your thoughts. If there's a guy, an ex-KU player that you think would be a great fit with this roster coming in, let us know. Tell us about it. Maybe it's something we'll talk about in the next episode too. If you have thoughts on the transfer portal, guys that you like, that you want to see coming in, let us know there. And then as far as the podcast is concerned, again, you can find us over on YouTube and over on Spotify. Wherever you watch or listen from, please hit that subscribe button. The more support we get from you guys, the more followers we get, the more fun stuff we can do down the road. Still have an endless amount of things I want to do with this podcast, and the more we grow, the better that chance will be. Obviously, like I said at the beginning of the episode, our last episode we did crossed over 1,600 views on YouTube, which we are super thankful for. I'm going to throw this out there. If we get a second video over 1,000, we'll do another big giveaway. So if this one gets over 1,000, which we'll tweet about it and share more. But if we get over 1,000 on this one, I'd love to do another big giveaway, just as a thank you. So guys, stay tuned, stay up to date with us, follow us on all those platforms, leave your comments for us, give us a review if you're on Spotify, if you're on YouTube, add a comment below, share a link with a couple of your friends, and as always from us here on the podcast, rock chalk.
Rock chalk.
Rock chalk.